Hi, Lapora here, and I'm here to talk to you about 5 signs that you're drifting from God. And this is so important because just like any relationship, but more important than any other relationship, we want to know the direction that our relationship with God, what direction that is taking, whether it's one down or up. And just like any other relationship, it can be in the positive or it can be in the negative, a lack. Like we know relationships in our lives when the communication is going well or the communication is off, we're not really understanding each other or spending as much time with each other. The same goes with our relationships with God, with Christ. There are ways that are signs that we're drifting. We talk about spiritual burnout in another blog, and that is the next phase after the spiritual burnout is a drift from God, and we don't want that to happen. So some signs that we're distancing. One is we're like when we talk to him, it's like a script, like we're going through the motions. We're not really feeling it. It's just like from a duty of prayer, a reciting. It may sound like a speech versus a heartfelt prayer. Another sign is we're wandering. Like I'm going to be honest, sometimes I'm praying, and the next thing you know, I'm thinking about 10 things I got to get done today. That's a sign that the relationship isn't where it's supposed to be. And that's a way that we can see that there is a distance. There might be a disconnect, between ourselves and God, because we should be aligned and tuned in that moment, intimate. You know what I mean? And so when we're having that conversation with God, it shouldn't be something where we're thinking about other things other than spending time with Him, hearing from Him. And then another way that we can tell that we're distancing ourselves from God is when we're choosing comfort over growth. And that's not to say that we shouldn't have joy, we shouldn't have fun in God. We should have a relationship that is comfortable with God because He knows more about us than anyone. But if we're in a situation where we're always just wanting to just take the easy route and not really be challenged by the way He wants us to be challenged, where we're avoiding those challenging questions about where we are spiritually, those bad habits that we have, we're avoiding dealing with thinking about that. Those are ways that we're distancing from God because we don't want to look at that ideal. We just want to be comfortable as far as where we are. And similar to that, another way is we're sticking to just Bible passages we already know, ones that we have memorized, ones that don't convict us because we don't want to deal with that part of the Bible because it's really uncomfortable right now. But that is a way to distance ourselves from God when we're not comfortable with digesting and absorbing the entire Bible. That's a sure sign. And then another way is when we are relying on other sources before God for input regarding our lives. Sometimes we may have like challenges, or want advice. And so we call this person or that person. The first person we're supposed to talk to is God and get God's perspective on the situation because that is going to give us the best advice. God sends people in our lives to give us advice, to give us wise counsel without a doubt. But that should not be our first stop. Our first stop should always be talking to God, to hear from Him directly first, because other people can lead us in the wrong direction. Even ourselves, we can lead our own selves in the wrong direction. So if our first response that we're looking for is not God, then obviously that's a distance that we are creating. And there are other places that we may go to, not just friends or loved ones, but now a lot of people go to social media. A lot of times I look up stuff on social media, about different things I want to learn about. We may Google, before we go to the Bible. And it's not that these aren't sources of information, but our first sources should be God. It should be His Word because, God is His Word. And then, another way similar to the information that we're retaining that's not from God, it's about how we are processing our feelings. Like we might have a bad day, someone may have hurt our feelings that day or made us angry, and what do? We just choose to sob, maybe brood instead of taking it to God. He said His yoke is easy, our yoke and His burden is light. So He doesn't want us carrying our own yoke, taking on our own burden. We're supposed to be giving that to Him. And so that is a problem if we're not comfortable when we are emotionally down going to God, if we'd rather turn on the TV and get distracted or just lay there and cry versus talking to God, we're distancing ourselves from that ultimate relationship that we can have with him. Another way that we are distancing ourselves is when we have, and this is similar, all head and no heart, and I can be guilty of this. We're just going to sit here and figure it out. We're going to solve this problem now. And a lot of times when we pray, God will take care of it much faster than we ever will. But we're so used to, relying on our own vices, on our own efforts, so to speak, that we don't feel like we need his efforts. And so that's going to have us miss out on the miraculous way that he can make things happen. Similar to that, like automated prayer that sounds more like a speech. Worshiping, if in your worship it's missing emotion. Sometimes you go to church and you might not be in the best mood, or even at home listening to certain music that normally would evoke a worshiping spirit in you, but instead the emotion isn't there. You're just not feeling that connection. And there are different reasons you might not be feeling that connection, right? You might be focused on other things that are going on in the world, in your life, or you might be frustrated about something. Sometimes we do get angry with God, if we be honest, and in those moments, we might not be as emotionally connected to worshiping him. And those are things we have to be honest with ourselves about, because that's going to help us in order to be more effective of having a great relationship with him. Another way we can distance ourselves is by compartmentalizing our experience with God. A lot of people compartmentalize their experience to God through church, like on Sundays. So they might compartmentalize their faith on Sundays and show up in church one way, and then the other 6 days have absolutely nothing to do with God. How are we going to limit God to one day when we say he is the owner of this entire universe, that he is omnipresent, he is everywhere, he is omniscient, he knows everything? So if we really believe that, we're not going to limit him to one day. That just doesn't even make any sense as to why we would do that. So, these are different ways that we can distance ourselves from God. And I think ultimately a lot of times we forget what God does. We forget how powerful he is in our lives and how powerful he can be in our lives when we mobilize him. And not that he's a genie, because he's not a genie in a bottle, but what he has given us is just this beautiful self-will, pretty much to do mostly everything that we want to do. And so he needs to know that we want him to be a navigator of our lives, to make choices for us so that he can take that role, obviously, that he should have. So I hope that you're blessed by this conversation. And if so, please share it with anyone else who you think might benefit from it. And have a wonderful day. Take care.